Okay, so this video will just basically be an introduction to object-oriented programming in Python. So it's probably a term you heard a lot, but the basic idea behind it is, I think, one related to problem solving. And what I mean by that is usually when we have a problem, we need to model it in some way. And before object-oriented programming paradigms sort of gained a foothold, I think it was traditionally, problems were traditionally looked at in terms of like the functions you'd need in order to find a solution. So basically your problem is some data, right? And then that data gets passed through a pipeline of functions. Um, and those two entities, the data and the functions, were more or less separate. And the benefit of object-oriented programming is that um, the way that you can model a problem becomes much more intuitive because the data and the behavior, aka functions, for some specific thing in the real world, such as um, like in a video game, you'd have an avatar or multiple players or whatever. So the data and the functions are sort of attached um, and bound under the name of a specific player. And so that's the advantage, is it's just much easier to conceive of, and arguably it makes your code a little bit easier to read on the surface. So what does that mean for Python? Well, um, the foundation of object-oriented programming, the core principles are classes and objects. And you can think of a class as a sort of blueprint for creating objects. So from a class, you can build any number of objects which have the properties laid out in the class. So for example, here we have a circle class. And we use this circle class to create a circle down here called C1. And that circle basically has some specific behavior called in the form of a function called speak. And what it does, so here's the data, and this would be the behavior. And so what I've done is I've taken the class definition, this is called a constructor right here, and I've constructed an object from the circle class, passing in this string circle. And what I get back is an object named C1. And C1 has the data specified inside of the class, notably the name attribute and also the speak function. Let's see. So let me run this real quick. Right, so we get I am a circle. And that's what we get because the class has created a circle and passed in this value circle in where we see name goes in the init method. A couple things about the sort of structure here. So you can sort of think of the class as a function with some data attached to it, if you want, and that's the thing that you use to make the objects. That's not probably a very precise or even correct definition, but I think when you're first starting out, it makes sense to think of the class as sort of like the factory for the object. But you're probably wondering about this whole business about self. So self is It's an argument that when a function is run, it is bound to the object. So basically, when I invoke the circle constructor with this argument circle, that argument is bound to the object under the property name, and basically self is sort of like a placeholder for C1. But notice like the definition of the class occurs before the object is created, so we need some sort of name, like a stand-in for the object that will be created. And in some languages you don't see this self parameter passed into each function, but Python requires you to. I don't know if that's because of the explicit is better than implicit item in the Zen of Python or what, but other languages you'd see a lot, like in Java or JavaScript, you'd see this. And in fact, you can use a different word. You don't have to use self, but you should, because if you don't, I don't think there's a person out there that wouldn't be sort of annoyed if you started using like this or something. So use self. And the thing to remember is that like when we usually write functions that aren't attached to an object, we are not passing in self. So you're probably going to forget to pass in self a lot, and you'll see errors like I'll show you one. Ready? But you'll see errors like function expected a certain number of arguments, but you've given it a different number, and you sit there and you say like, it looks like I gave it the right amount of arguments, and then you realize you forgot self. Let's see what this says. Yep, exactly. So speak takes no arguments, but one is given. And that argument that is given is self. Okay.